Testing here. I believe I'm going live right now. Alright, I am going live right now. Hey guys, I'm Justin Mott. Welcome to my home here in Hanoi, Vietnam. And welcome to my channel. And this is a brand new live stream series I'm working on. I'll be sorting some technical things out while I'm doing this, so bear with me. But I'm going to have some questions up here. Well, I'm going to allow you guys to ask me some questions here. So I'm going to put that in right now in the comments section. Just give me 1 minute. And I'm also going to try to put this also on Instagram in the future too, so if people want to ask me there or connect there, they can. I believe we're live here. Looks like we're live here. So today I'm going to be talking about, this is a new series where I basically show some pictures from my portfolio. They could be personal projects, they could be single images, or from assignment work, or just personal images. I kind of just break them down. So today I'm going to go through a New York Times assignment that I shot a long time ago, back in 2010 in Cambodia. And along the way, guys, if something pops up, I'll cue you guys, but you can ask me questions live here in the comment section. I'll do my best to answer your questions on the fly. And if you're not watching this live, I'll do my best to answer the questions later on if you have any questions along the way. A couple things to just keep in mind. I'm still sorting some things out, so it's kind of annoying, like this wire here to monitor, because I can't figure out how to do earpods max Bluetooth while I'm doing OBS here at the same time. Still sorting that out. Got my fan there because this room isn't cooled, so the fan might be blowing a little bit into the mic, but hopefully it's not too bad. So I got the mic right here. And I'll try to keep this today to, I don't know how long it's going to be. Could be like 15 minutes, could be 3 hours. No, it should be about 15 minutes or so, maybe longer. My last one was about 30, but I'll keep this as short as possible. But I'm going to go through the images, tell you a little backstory about them, give you guys some tips and advice, and just hopefully offer you guys a little bit of insight in what it's like to be a professional photographer and what like being on assignments like. So hold on 1 second. I'm just going to type a couple things in here. Ask questions live here. I'm going to also put this on Instagram that I am live right now, so people that are checking that out right now can check me out right now. So I'm going to do that as well. If you have, keep the questions, guys, related to the images that I'm showing today. I mean, related to, like, kind of to that. I mean, don't just randomly ask me, like, what my favorite ISO is. When someone asks me that question, that's always my default humor one right there. Yeah, I'm going to post here. Let's see, just bear with me. I'm going to just share a story here just so people that are interested and that want to connect with me live can do so right now. I'm going to switch over my OBS here now to here. And I should have photo review on, and yes, I do. I'm going to get like a cool graphics package going on later on, I hope. Still yet to figure that out, but I figured why not do that, like record now and figure that stuff out later? Because who has patience for that stuff? OBS is like, I can tell I'm gonna like it, this software, but right now I hate it. It's just too complicated for me, for my dumb brain. All right, here. Anyway, I'm not gonna put that on Instagram right now. For some reason, I'm having trouble logging on there, and I feel like I'm gonna lose you guys. So wait, maybe I could do it right now. Hold on. No. Hold on. Story. Let's get this live right now. I am live now, so I want to show that I am live now. All right, there we go. All right, so this here today I'm going to talk about an assignment I did in 2010, like I mentioned. This was a New York Times assignment, so I figured I'd give you guys just a little bit of a backdrop, a little bit of backstory about how that might happen as a professional photographer. So, you know, once you're already in with the New York Times, that's its whole other story. I've done sort of videos about how to get in publications and things like that. There's no real easy answer. It's not like, oh, I have people just email me like, can you give me the contact for your editor? It's not that easy. Like, yeah, some friends that I know very well, they've got in. Simple as that. My story was a lot longer. You know, that story right there is my first front page for the New York Times. My first ever assignment for the New York Times, and I got the front page. But that was like years to get to that point, and then months even after I met the editor, multiple editors in New York before I even got an assignment. So it's not something that's quite as easy as you think. Although it can be for some people, it took me a long time to get there. So once I got in with the New York Times, I was doing some assignments. What would happen is normally, they have different tiers of photographers. They won't say that, or at least that's kind of how it used to be. It's still kind of like that, but like different editors, different departments, business section, travel section, foreign desk. Sometimes I'd work with the office out of Hong Kong, and sometimes I work with the office out of France, and sometimes I work with the office out of New York. Different editors you get to know, and different editors for different types of assignments as well, different departments. So I was kind of passed around quite a bit, which was nice. Like they would use me for a little bit of everything, all sorts of different kinds of stories. And a lot of times people might be known for like the Hanoi guy, but I was kind of known as like the Southeast Asia guy pretty quickly. So that was nice. I would team up with a writer often for like big breaking news stories. I didn't do a ton of that stuff, but any sort of feature stories and things like that, I still was teamed up with a writer out of Bangkok, a full-time writer, and then sometimes I would just do travel stories that the writer had freelance writers that had already done the story, and I was just going back through the shot list. This story here was with one of their staff writers. This was out of Cambodia, and the way it would come in by email typically. Most of the time, unless it was something last minute, they didn't typically call you by phone. I mean, who wants to get a phone call and talk on the phone? They would typically send an email and say like, all right, we've got the story coming up. The writer's this writer. They wouldn't even always tell you exactly what the story is, because if you couldn't take on the assignment, it was very clandestine. They didn't want to like you to like give it away, or maybe like, just not that any photographer would, or not that I would, but some would, just by maybe passing it on conversation or something like that. So just give me like a broad thing, like, hey, are you available for an assignment in Cambodia between these dates? Or if it was the writer going there and I was meeting the writer, it would be like these exact dates. So this story, they said, listen, we've got the story, a couple stories. The writer's going to Cambodia to work on a few things, and he's out of Bangkok, so can you meet him there these dates? Got the email, I agreed. They told me more about the story. Then I would link up with the writer, and he would give me a little bit of insight, tell me his dates, and we would just try to align our time. Obviously, for a story like this, we could be there at the same time. So a little bit of backstory about this in particular. Again, I was there for several days. I was there for about a week in Cambodia, but this story itself, I think we shot in 2 days. And this was a report coming out by a human rights organization talking about drug addicts that were in prison that were abused by the prison guards. So all these reports are coming out by this NGO that was working with a lot of these prisoners when they got out of prison, helping with their drug rehab, and they were reporting physical abuse by the guards. And so, hit the ground running there, tried to get into the prison. Obviously, that wasn't met with much positive thought there. They were like, no, but different in some places. Even being around the outside of the prison, I probably couldn't have done any pictures there, but in Cambodia it used to be a lot easier for things like that. So I did, but we went to the organization themselves. We said, can we interview some of the people that have reported this? And they were skeptical, obviously. They wanted to make sure that story was told fair. They wanted to make sure that the subject in the story remained anonymous. They were definitely worried about a photographer, but I needed to get images. I needed to try to tell the story. I didn't want to put anyone in a tough situation. So we just asked, and we just talked it through. We talked to one of the leaders of the NGO, went to the drug rehab center, and the solution I came up with, I was like, well, I had to propose this to them because they said no pictures whatsoever. And I said, well, what about if I took the pictures of a lot of these people who wanted to be interviewed to get the story out? Because they wanted to get the story out. But I didn't show their full faces because they were afraid for repercussions by the police and by the government, things like that. So that's what happened. I said, listen, I could do it in this way where I could use window light or side light or little patches of light that I could find nearby. I was kind of just thinking of this on the fly because I didn't know if they would say no, and we didn't have time. I kind of just flew there and had to get right into the story. So they said, I showed them some samples. I took some pictures and said, this is kind of how it would work, and this is how I would do it for all the people. And she said, fine, you can interview all of them, and it's up to each person individually, obviously, if they would trust that. So, I appreciated their trust. I valued their that they wanted to remain anonymous, and so what I did was I just really played around with. I wanted a series of portraits. I was also going to do some reportage, going out into the streets, checking out the drug scene, the heroin scene there, the glue sniffing scene. There was a whole area of Phnom Penh that was very, very heavily affected by drugs, and tons of drug addicts in the area. There's outreach programs, so I figured I could get in with them doing that. But in the beginning, I wanted to do portraits of these people because these are the people whose stories are getting out. These are going to be the sort of meat of the story. I say the meat of the story, and I'm vegetarian, so I'm going to start saying the tofu of the story for those of you out there that vegetarian. So I knew it would get quite redundant if I just did everything with a little bit of side light and half of their face. So I played around with multiple different people in the shots. Like these were two guys here that I interviewed, that the writer interviewed. And again, I would sit in on some of the interviews, and then often the writer would sort of tell me like, okay, well, this person's probably be in the story. This person maybe won't be in the story. And then I would just take as many portraits and get all their information, caption information as well. We shared a translator, budgets were like that. So we shared a translator. So we'd separate sometimes we work together, and I found nearby, because I knew people didn't want to leave the center. I didn't want to go all around, Phnom Penh with them, and I didn't want to take up their time. And so I found this interesting side light coming in and sort of planned it and spent like a couple hours in the morning because I knew if midday the light's not going to come in directly through the top, it was coming into the side. So I timed it after sort of not a scouting day, but after the first day of just looking around, getting a feel for the story. And then I just did tons of portraits like this. So this is the first one here. I tried this layered shot because there was one window up front, another window in the back. And this is all natural light. This was a long time ago. This was all shot with, most of this was probably shot. Sorry I don't have the metadata up here, but I can tell you roughly what this was shot with. Most of these were shot with a Canon 5D Mark II and a 35 millimeter. I do a lot of vertical portraits. I do a lot of horizontal portraits. It's just something I like to do, and I like shooting with a 35, as many of you follow me know. I gotta check out how to get this open, so if you guys are asking me questions, definitely like old man technical things today that I'm not awesome at, so I do apologize. I am working on that. I am studying this stuff. I have it live here on my phone, so if you're asking questions. And Marlon said, this is great. Thank you for doing this. Marlon, thank you. You know, people ask questions. Makes me feel good. Makes me want to do more of these. I was thinking about also doing some gear reviews. On that note, while I'm here, I owe a review of this guy here. I've been using it, and that was rough. I'll be doing a review. I'm not sure if I'm going to do a live review, but I'm going to do a review soon about this here. It's a lower end budget-wise, but it's a higher end like quality tripod by Manfrotto. It's been around for a long, long time, but this is their B-Free Live video fluid tripod head. It's my hybrid go-to for when I want to go out and shoot video and stills at the same time. I'm not going to do, this won't be a review, but I will do a full review about this soon. I'm just trying to debate if I can do it live or not, because I think live I'm going to have to like show it, and I don't have different camera angles set up yet. But anyway, that's just a little something I'm going to do in the future, play around with live reviews. So again, I played with that natural light. I was looking for, it was basically just window light. That's all I had. And then different ways that I could, that's how I started. That was the progression. Like, okay, I'll just let a little bit of light capture the faces. And then I was just very fair to them. I said, listen, I'll let you guys approve everything. It's not something I would normally do as a photographer. Like, I'm going to do a story about you. You have to approve all the pictures. I don't feel like that would be good journalism. But in this case, where they could get hurt because, or go back to prison because of speaking out, something bad would happen to them. I wanted to respect that and honor that. So yes, I came up with a creative composition for the shots and how I would shoot it. But I would say, listen, if you think this shows too much of your face, I'll delete it. And I did, and it didn't happen because I knew what would show, what I could leave out, and what I knew I could hide most of their faces basically. So I did that, and yeah, they approved just about everything. And so that's one of my favorite portraits there. That's the one that kind of got the big lead on the insert for the story itself. Moving on, I played around with shooting through different things, playing around with shooting lights and whatever I could find, just showing people's eyes, just showing half of their face. Sometimes not. Some of the people were fresh out of prison, still had bumps and bruises, or one guy had a bandage on his nose. So this was just playing around with shooting different things. Again, playing with that side light. Sometimes I just hold a glass up in front of me or whatever I could find. I'm very much the type of photographer who's like, I'm horrible at planning. I'm not horrible, like, I can plan when I have to, but I don't like to plan creatively because I just think I won't be as good. I'm like a MacGyver. I like to look around and be like, oh, there's a picture frame with glass, or this is something I could shoot through, or that's just kind of how I work best. So there's another portrait. A few of these ran. It's again playing around with the same sort of light. I just found these little patches of light, and I just did portraits within these patches of light. And here, this guy, he was willing to show a little bit more of his face, even though this was, you could see quite a bit. It's still quite dark. I guess you could make him out, but he was okay with it, so I showed that. But some of them were very strict about what I could and couldn't show. Here was something where it was a little more vague, just showing his eye there. Again, playing around with negative space, playing around with the mood. Obviously, the mood fit this story too. It's not like just playing around with light and saying like, oh, this is interesting light, but it makes sense to the story as well. It's dark and moody light, and it's a dark story. I mean, it's a sad story. These drug addicts were going to prison. They were being physically abused, punched in the face, all sorts of different things. I don't want to get into that whole story, but it was terrible. So again, playing around, just limited rooms, smaller rooms. It's an NGO that had this little drug rehab center, so there's people just there sleeping. I was playing around with, after being a little bit redundant with all the portraits, like what else could I do? Maybe my editor's going to run out of shots like this if we do a slideshow. For my New York Times stories, I always have to think multiple ways, especially back then because we were doing slideshows. So I always had to think like, what's a shot that could be on the cover? What's a series that I could spread out across a slideshow, and then what would make for a good layout? Because one editor might like a layout of 5 different sort of moody shots with just a little bit of light, and that might be like, okay, that's a theme, and that kind of works. Some editors aren't as risky, and they want a nice variety, and they might want some stuff like on the street too, and not just portraits. So I always had to cover myself. I think that's one thing you ask editors about me is I would give them a lot to play with, and also with the New York Times, I was dealing with different editors. So sometimes I'd get the assignment from New York, or I'd get the assignment from Paris, but then New York would run the story too, and they don't want to run the same pictures always as the other editor would run, or it's all the same on the website but different in print. So I always had to shoot like a wide variety. So I tried to play around outside with how else I could hide their identity, and so this was just like, okay, right outside the building there was these shades that came down. I liked the colors, and just showing a little bit of his. So hot in Phnom Penh, so a lot of these guys were shirtless all the time. I didn't like ask them to take their shirts off. It's just hot there, and so showed half his face there covered up. Again, just trying to shoot everything I can in good light, trying to make the light make sense for the story, and getting a good variety. But yeah, so just to backtrack a little bit, so. There was a slideshow of some of the images, and then this image again was like the big image, and I was happy with that. Don't always get that as a photographer. Like the image that you think is the most daring, the most creative, the most interesting doesn't always get published, doesn't always get picked. You send a selection, but you have to send a wide selection. Then your editor, you might think like you get to say like this. I'm sure some photographers are that good or that cocky that they say this one runs, this one doesn't. But I've never reached that level, and I'm okay with that. I'm like, I'll suggest if I know an editor well, like I think this fits well to the story because this is a great interview, or the writer might help me out and say like I like this shot because I like this because this really makes sense for my story and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the photo editor is going to make the decision. This was just some other more like reportage. That same guy, just trying to play around with him out of focus to like going through. This is the center itself. I did a lot of this one guy because he had a lot to say. This is the center. I mean, this one really was tough to get because everyone here didn't want their identity shown. So this is one of those tough shots where it was like afternoon, it gets really hot. They were napping. You can see that dappled light in the background here if I've got my got that open there. You can see the little dappled light. That's where I played around with. That's where I did a lot of my shots, just putting people in this light. When I'm doing portraits, things like that, if it's not at eye level, I'll have you sit down. I'll have you whatever I can do to get those shots, to get them creatively, and again to tell the story. This was quite a unique situation. So. But here, quite lucky to get a wide shot that didn't show someone's face. This took a lot of time. So this everyone at the drug rehab center just kind of taking naps, but you can see like not one person's identity shown. I wanted to stay true to my word, obviously. Then we hit the streets. Hit the streets with a outreach program. Quite interesting at the time. There was a lot of Khmer men that were there that were like drug counselors that actually got in trouble in the U.S. They grew up in the U.S. and that's a whole other story too, but I didn't know about that at the time. Like they were convicted felons in the U.S. and got sent back to Cambodia, but they spent their whole lives in the U.S. So they didn't even speak the language, didn't even know anything about the culture. A lot of them grew up their entire lives in the U.S. and had to go back after being felons because their parents didn't have the right paperwork and they weren't legally in the U.S. And then after you're convicted of a felony, you get sent back. So that was a whole other story. But I found a lot of these guys were doing really good things in the community. Community reach out programs, needle exchanges, talking to drug addicts, trying to get them off drugs, trying to get them off the street into the center. But yeah, I just kind of wander around with some of these guys. It's a little bit scary, a little bit rough to be in some of these neighborhoods and people shooting up heroin. You're trying to take photos. I was looking for creative ways to do it without them kind of knowing, trying to set the scene of what it was like there. I mean, because in addition to the portraits in addition to the abuse side of the story, you have to paint a picture of what's going on with the drug scene in Cambodia as well. Why has it gotten to this? Why is there so many drug prisoners and what? So, play fair to both sides of the story. Obviously, I would love to get into the prison as well. There just wasn't enough time. And, you can get into prison, so I don't want to say you can't, but it's usually a lot of paperwork. And usually if you're a foreigner in another country, it's going to be quite difficult. Some countries it might even be quite easy. It just kind of depends. So this was just finding people, a lot of these guys were motorbike drivers, motorbike taxi drivers, just finding people shooting up on the side of this road. A lot of the drug scene there tied into the sort of prostitution scene as well. So a lot of these little like areas where people were living in the slums where, there was a lot of drug dealing happening in there. And I actually caught a couple of drug deals, like actually got a photo of a drug deal happening. The only thing I was actually scared of being there shooting, because the people were really kind of welcoming to me being there for the most part. The only thing I was scared of is that, like, the police came and did like a raid, and because people think that they came there because they saw a foreign journalist there, and they kind of like shoot us away. So that was actually not what you normally think, right? You normally think like you're afraid of like someone robbing you of a bunch of drug addicts there, but it was more afraid of the police in Cambodia at the time. This guy passed out just after he shot up, and this was just another guy kind of showing us around, showing us the area. There's people just staying on cots, a bunch of garbage everywhere, slum area, just shooting up and just kind of hanging out in the streets. This was like an actual drug deal caught, in the process, I was shooting from the hip here. As you can see, my composition's not exactly perfect because I had to shoot kind of like this. And yeah, I mean, just kind of caught that money exchange just as it was happening. It's just time. It's just going there. I didn't have a ton of time for the story, but this was just a full, I think it was a half day doing portraits and a day and a half of doing reportage on the street. Trying to find some scene setters to show sort of the area where a lot of the drug deals are happening, the areas where a lot of the prostitutes are dealing drugs and consuming drugs and like that. This is a big problem in Cambodia, or at least was. Hopefully it's been cleaned up, but sniffing glue, it's a cheap high. You see a lot of people doing it, so I was following these kids around, shooting this, and this is sort of some of the areas. This is a drug deal that I mentioned that just kind of happened right at the moment. Just kind of caught it very naturally. just there with my camera, just there capturing what I can. Oh, we already saw that picture. It's another Sam driver shooting up on heroin. Woman who's just about to sort of shoot up there. I did my best to hide, everyone's identity the best I could. So that was it. I mean, that's sort of the story. That was a New York Times assignment. That was a 2-day story that ended up being a slideshow and ended up running in print globally on U.S. edition and global edition, which used to be the International Herald Tribune. A 2-day assignment, for those of you who want to know like about price and what they used to pay and things like that. I believe the New York Times pays $250 a day, plus your expenses. So people always ask me that question, like, oh, do they pay for you to fly to Cambodia? Yes, it's not going to be extravagant expenses, but your hotel, your food, your taxis, your airfare, all that stuff, obviously paid. You get paid, reimbursed later on. The payment's not great for their assignments, but I've always led to other work. I think now it's more like $350 a day. So a 2-day assignment there. Did a bunch of other stories on top of that. A lot of times when a writer goes to a country, if they're not based in that country, they try to get in as many. They might go there for one primary story and then do a bunch of separate stories as well. I used to work with their bureau, sort of their regional guy, Seth Mydens, fantastic writer. His father was a famous photographer. Seth was like a mentor to me. Wonderful guy and fantastic journalist, and I love working for him, and I learned a lot. Learned a lot from writers. I'll say that as a photographer, good writers. And a lot of people might ask, like, is it good? Is it helpful to work with a writer, or you prefer to work alone? It really depends on the writer. It really depends on the story. With Seth, I always preferred to work directly with him. Some writers prefer to go different ways, and not because they're anything personal. I mean, sometimes personal, but often it was just because we're looking for different things, They want to interview the fisherman, I want to be in the boat with the fisherman kind of thing. Some questions here. I'm just going to pull up while I've got you here. No questions, just people commenting, but everything and nothing said thank you. Glad I caught this. Was sad I missed it. Great for experience, but not for the money. Yeah, that's true. I mean, New York Times assignments were always that. That's all. I always looked at it that way. And people say, like, oh, that's bull crap. They don't pay you. That was their rate. They don't make a ton of money. Yeah, you can debate that. But I just look at it like, for me, it was fine. Early on in my career, it was fine. Now I'm more selective on the assignments that I take and the stories that I want to do. I do a lot of commercial work these days, sure, but the meat of my career, the tofu of my career, early on in my career, this was it. This led to a lot of other work too. Then I know they know that, and I know it's kind of built into the cost. But New York Times stuff they'd republish it again, and they'd pay you extra for that, or stories would get picked up to the agency that represents the New York Times archive, or I would sell images for other stories, things like that. It would lead to a ton of other work. So New York Times was like really like built who I am as a photographer. I mean, I leveraged that, so you could say they use you, but I use them just as well. I really leveraged that to do all sorts of kind of other photography. I mean, when I did commercial work and I told people I worked for the New York Times, even though it's not related at all, they loved it. I mean, it sort of validated who I was and sort of my professionalism. So little did they know I think I was pretty professional. And I did go to school for journalism, not that everyone has to, but I did understand, journalism ethics and things like that. And yeah, you don't always make the right decisions, or you might make mistakes along the way, but I always thought I tried to be fair and tried to grow. And it's a big part of my career was doing this kind of work, and I really enjoyed it. I still enjoy it to this day. I just do more of it on my own. I do my own kind of stories now, stories that I'm interested, I follow and do them, and then I pitch them afterwards. That's kind of how I operate now. I still get assignment work, but again, like I said, I'm more selective. So I'm going to check here if there's any more questions on here. No, I think that's it. That's it for today, guys. I appreciate you tuning in. Sorry about the slow start there. If you've got ideas on other things you'd like to see me do live, this is something I think I would really like to pursue. It's like I've got a ton of images in my archive, a ton of stories, a ton of projects. I think they've all got an interesting backstory. This one's fascinating just because, I mean, from a photography perspective, I'm going to talk about that. Obviously, it's a much bigger deal talking about, the situations happening there, but that's not what my channel is about, and that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm sure that's not what you guys are here to talk about, or listen to me talk about. I just wanted to kind of use this story as a way to say, like, okay, certain stories, commercial work or editorial work, wedding work, whatever you're doing, really, there's things you have to work around. And this one was quite tough, like not showing people's faces, but still kind of getting a feel for who they are as people, and humanizing them so people care about the story. It was a tricky one, and I was very happy with the outcome. My editor was very happy with the outcome. And, it's just one of those projects that every time I look at it, I'm proud of what I produced during that time. And sometimes it's a sell, as a photographer, you got to sell your editor on it. I wasn't confident at the time to just do this, because I probably could have worked it, probably could have done a little bit better if I spent 2 full days. But in addition to that, I also did the reportage stuff. But I think that was really important for the story to capture that drug scene. I think it was risky at times to be out there, but a lot of people do war stuff, cover stuff, war zones. So I don't want to sound like I was risking my life. Some stuff you do is dangerous. You have expensive equipment, things like that. But I was a little bit more carefree back then than I am now, and anything to get the story. But more importantly, I just want to get the story right and cover all my angles and make sure I covered everything for my editor. So if you don't have any questions, I think, okay, I will answer a question by Marlon here. So just when you think I'm going to go, here I am. Marlon asked, how do you monetize your own stories? Marlon, that's a tough one, man, because, a lot of times, New York Times, a lot of the stories come from writers. Sometimes the stories come from photographers, but often it's really hard pitch. They've got a bunch of people pitching. They like to do their own homework, and they like stories to be generated from their team, their staff that they're paying a lot of money and benefits to. Some people do it well, some people don't. For me, I do my own personal projects, but not with that in mind, because I'm just not in that situation. So I'm kind of lucky in that way. I mean, it took me a long time to get there, but my commercial work, I try to monetize it after. My editorial work is paid for by my commercial work. So my Kindred Guardians project, when I shoot stuff for that, I don't think of it in that way. But if you were trying to monetize your work, then a lot of times you're not going to get approval ahead of time for a budget. You're probably just going to have to do it. And chances are, the reality is you're lucky if you recuperate your expenses, depending on where you're going. I mean, it's different. So when I went and shot my story about the northern white rhinos, I knew that was a newsworthy story, but that's not why I did it. I knew people would be interested, but other people have done it. But again, I knew it was marketable. So I did sell it to Washington Post, but they paid me $700 for the story. And that was my expenses for food and lodging for a week. It was cheap to stay there and stuff, but that was it. I mean, the flight was $2,000. I sold different magazines, different prices. I also sold the story to Greenpeace, and they paid $2,000. And in the end, I ended up recuperating most of the expenses. I think more. That story, I think I actually profited off of in the end, kind of, not factoring in if you say what my day rate would be. I didn't get any of that, but I probably made my expenses back, plus a little more. But that's not what I look for in a story these days. But if you're early in your career, you have to look at stories that, if you're going to pitch to a certain newspaper, a different magazine, or website, you got to look at who's got a budget for these things, what kind of stories are they interested in, has it been done, can you do it better, or do you have a different angle, that kind of thing. And then do you have an in with them? That's hard. So it's hard. It's not easy. I'm not here to lie and say it's easy. I don't like to bullshit people about that kind of stuff, because it's not. I think some of my other stories were really even just as powerful. I did a story about the soy dog place, but that was just stray dogs in Thailand, so no one wanted that story. That story never sold, but I was okay with that because it all feeds into my project, and I donate the images, and so I have a different agenda with that stuff. And not to say it's wrong to want to make money. You do have to make a living doing your own stories, but it's hard. Personal projects, pitching them on, very rarely do you recuperate your expenses, or very rarely are you paid to get them published later on. Typically, again, a lot of magazines like to use their own people, like to generate their own stories by their own writers, things like that. Not impossible, just difficult. Yeah, that's it for today, guys. Don't forget to check out my online store at justinmott.com. I've got my presets on there for $4.99. I got the package for $8.99. They add little pop-through images, just a Lightroom preset that you can add. I use that on my images, not a ton. I don't like to overdo my shots, so it's a little bit of clarity, a little bit of contrast. It punches the image up a little bit. You can check that out. I mean, that's just kind of how I tone all my editorial images. I've got my one-on-one classes for those of you interested in help with a project, interested in help with your portfolio. I've got 1-hour sessions for $125, and I've got longer mentorship packages. I think I only have 2 left right now. I do a limited of 5 a month, but my mentor packages, they're a lot. They're a big commitment for people, but if you're interested in that, they go for $1,500, and it's a 1 month. It's 6 sessions, weekly assignments, portfolio review. It's really in-depth, unlimited WhatsApp messages. We call, we talk, we chat. It's really to dive in. Some people do it multiple months. Some people just do it to kickstart a project. They do it for a month. You can check that out. I know for a lot of you out there it's expensive, but it's very labor intensive on my side. I work with you a lot offline and a lot online. But it's great for people that really want to kickstart, whether it's a project or for your business or things like that. I help people Everything's customized to you, one-on-one sessions, like I said, once a week, and then a lot of offline work as well. So you can check all that out at justinmott.com. Thank you guys for tuning in. I will improve my live feed. I think the audio's okay. I think the fan's directly in here, but I'm going to try to do some reviews. I'm going to try to add some graphics, try to spice it up a little bit, make it a little more sexy to hide from my unsexiness. Thank you guys for tuning in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to have a wonderful day. Well, it's Sunday. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.